Welcome to A Little Bit Radical, a business podcast from Standing on Giants. I'm Rob, your host. Join me as I meet people and organisations who are doing things differently, challenging the status quo and, yes, might just be a little bit radical.
Help fix climate change. This is the simple promise of the GLAD Climate Club. GLAD aims to help individuals and companies participate in the biggest cleanup operation ever undertaken, which you can join from just £1, dollar or euro a day. I'm speaking to the founder today, Ben Wynn. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Hey Rob, great to be here. Delighted to be on the show.
Thank you very much for joining us. Ben, if you are a little bit radical and you're on our podcast, so we know that you are, what in your early life set you up for that?
Well, it's a good question. I don't think there's a specific thing, but life, I guess, is shaped by key moments and the decisions you make in them. And obviously, being an advocate of the show, I've thought about this a lot. Listen, you were going to ask me the question. And so there's a story that I think is a real catalyst for what ended up happening in my life. It's a real sliding doors moment. And it's the moment that I very nearly staked Swampy. So Swampy,
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know whether you know Swampy, Rob.
No, tell us who Swampy is.
Yeah, so an environmental activist. This is going back to 1996, so it's going back a while. This dates me, and I was at university at the time, or I was on my industrial placement at the time. And I was sponsored through university by Balfour Beatty. The placement, therefore, was a Balfour Beatty job. They're a big construction firm, and they were building the extension road between Honiton and Exeter down in Devon. 17 kilometres of road going through a bit of greenbelt. And Swampy, or Daniel Hooper, as his full name, was the guy who became notorious at the time for digging tunnels as a protester in the ground where the road was supposed to go through, or chaining himself to trees. And first 2 weeks on my first ever kind of professional job, my job was to help the security team ring fence these tunnels and trees. So this is in a place called Fairmile in Devon, and there's a small copse of trees on top of a hill. Protesters chained to the trees, and the hill is where all of the tunnels were. So if you can picture it, Rob, you've got a fence around the trees with police all around the fence, and then the media to the side of that. And it's early in the morning, and it's eviction time. And the way that process works, I didn't know at the time, is if the protester leaves the cordon, then they're arrested, taken away, and it's a waiting game. You just wait for them to leave. They've got no food, they've got no water, so ultimately, at some point, they'll leave. The security guys have been there 24/7 for weeks, and they assure us that there's no one in the tunnels. There's just about 4 or 5 left in the trees. And so we're waiting for them to leave. A couple leave, and the security team, I say, there's no one in those tunnels, and what they do is the police will give the order, and you move the fence 1 metre in at a time. So my job, sledgehammer in hand, is to smack the stake into the ground as we'd move the fence post 1 metre in. And the people in the trees, oh my goodness, they're going ballistic, screaming at us. They're saying, no, don't do that. There are people in the tunnels. Anyway, as I stick the stake in the ground, up pops this character out of the ground, covered in mud, Swampy. And I very nearly had stuck a stake straight through him. So just imagine how my life would have been. Goodness me.
I don't think we'd be sitting here having an interview, frankly, Ben.
No, I think it would have been very different. But yeah, so I nearly staked him. And I guess that was a catalyst for me thinking about my future. Do I want to be in a yellow vest with a white hat on and bother boots doing this kind of thing? Well, really what it made me think about is, do I want to be in the world of construction? And the reality I got to was it's just about time and impact. And the problem for me with the construction industry is just so slow. The nature of it, building a road is one thing, but if you're building a bridge or a tower, the safety aspect means you've got to get everything absolutely right, and therefore you go slower. And so that road itself took 10 years from planning to build. And therefore I was like, well, how many of these things could I possibly do in my career? And I just figured I wanted more of an impact on people's lives. It just felt like it would go too slow. And sure, those that are driving to Exeter Airport can get there quicker. But I just felt I could have a bigger impact on a more global stage. And so ultimately left civil engineering. That was one of the decisions, and decided to set out on a different journey. I spent the last, whatever it is, 30 years in startup scale-up environments trying to have that impact, really.
I'd never thought about that before, Ben, but obviously, so if you're, I was thinking the architect or you're the project manager, contract manager of like a massive bridge, that's basically all one thing you do in a whole career. If it takes 30 years, right?
Takes a long, long time. Yeah.
Yeah, incredible. There's got to be something to be said for that kind of slow gratification, I'm sure, but I can understand entirely why that wasn't for you. I don't think it would be for me either.
I think it's a degree of impatience, which I don't think is a virtue, but yes, that's definitely where it stems from.
Well, really interesting framing of our conversation. So you were there kind of front and center with activists, people who are very radical, but we're here talking to you about being a little bit radical, and that was the start of your journey. So as you've become an adult, well, you were an adult at the time, but as you've grown in your career and become more experienced, do you think you've become more radical, less radical? And what's been behind that?
Well, for me, being a little bit radical is just really about thinking different, following your own path. And I think a good source of inspiration for me, although I never got to meet him, would have been Steve Jobs. It's a fairly well-trodden path, and you think different, you think Apple, it's the whole thing. And when you think about Jobs, lots of people would go to that quote that's the think different thing. The people who are crazy enough to think they can change the world are the ones that are, or that do. I don't actually think he even wrote that. I think that was the advertising agency that gave him Think Different. But there is a quote from Jobs that I like. It's just the way I think about this idea of being radical. So he said, everything around you that you call life was made up by people that were no smarter than you. And you can change it. You can influence it. You can build your own things that other people can use. And I think even though I didn't know that quote until much later, I think that's what I've been doing throughout my whole career, really. It's just a sense of make it up as you go along and try to bring your ideas, your visions into reality.
Great. And as we come onto your work now, tell us about Glad Climate Club and what it is and what you're trying to do, how you came to found it.
Yeah, so a move into climate for me was my kind of lockdown moment. I realized I'd spent a long time building businesses, effectively helping to make other people get rich, and not enough of that impact that I knew I wanted to have very early on in my career. And so I sat down and said, well, what do I want to work on? I went through the UN sustainability goals, and what was a very long story, hopefully a little bit shorter, I put climate change at the top of the tree, because for me, if we don't get that right, everything else is just going to get a heck of a lot harder. And so I said, well, if, a bit like in construction, I have a 10-year period to try to influence something, let me try to influence that. And then we sat down and said, well, let's have a look at the world of climate, the industry. How is it being tackled right now, and how could we make a difference? And our view is just that things are not quite right in the climate change community right now. It's compliance-led, and we've got a real communications problem. And so we figured those were the two levers. So what we try to do as GLAD is just make it easy and affordable for people to play their part. That's really what this is about. Because right now, compliance-led, for us, what that means is it's the regulation that's placed on businesses that's causing people to do something. But the problem is that regulation is far too loose, far too little, and the businesses that are doing it because they're told to do it. That's fine, but they're just not enough. It's too slow, it's too little. And so really we need to tighten up that regulation. But in today's market, quite hard to perceive how that's going to happen.
Yeah, when we're talking together, we've just had BP say, oh, we're going to deprioritize all our sustainable energy efforts and focus on oil and gas. It doesn't feel like a good time to be in this world, right?
Yeah, particularly if you look at it through the lens of this is about compliance, and compliance will, the stick approach. We think there's a carrot approach, but only if we get the comms part of it right. So if you look at climate change comms, it's not worked so far. We've done things, the climate community, have done things like tomorrow targets, net zero by 2050. And what people hear is, oh, that's ages away. And then we talk about things like 1 degree of warming. Oh, it doesn't sound too bad, does it? And then even the names, climate change. It's all right. It's a bit of a change. Change is as good as a rest. Global warming. Yeah, I could do with it being a bit warmer. And just like the words we're using are just fundamentally wrong. So The Guardian took this and they said, oh no, it's the climate crisis. And then you've got climate catastrophe and this sort of dramatization of it. But what that does is breed fear. And then you get the other side of it where the kind of activists or advocates are shaming people and shaming business into it. And then it just makes everybody feel bad. We think that that's just not the right approach. The only way that you influence governments to take action, to increase that compliance and engage people in this is through positive reinforcement. So it's hope and empowerment, or hope and inspiration, that's the anchor for GLAD. That's why we call it GLAD. We want to instill that hope. And we believe that if we can get enough people taking part and showing others, that's the inspiration that you need. So much more Nike than some sort of big carrot and stick type business.
Well, I enjoyed you talking about the carrot and the stick there. And I was just wondering, I was sort of thinking, has the carrot approach started to work somewhere? And I suppose that led me to electric cars, which again, as we're talking, quite a astonishing thing happening there with Elon Musk, particularly in Tesla. But I suppose that's a carrot approach, isn't it? You design cars that everyone needs, and all the companies are doing it now, and they're beautiful cars and they work just as well as, in theory, just as well as a petrol car. And then we're going to give you a tax incentive or salary sacrifice thing so that you can adopt one, right? That's an example of a kind of carrot approach to solving this issue.
Yeah, so, highly contentious right now and personal opinion for good reason, but I've looked at what Musk has done with his companies over time with a lot of admiration, and look at what Tesla did to that market. It's show not tell, which is something that we are big advocates of. And so everybody for years said that electric cars weren't the thing. They said it wasn't going to happen. They said the range was too short, range anxiety was the drug, all of these barriers.
What about hydrogen?
Exactly. Yeah. I'm not buying electric. I'm going to wait for the hydrogen car to come along, all that sort of thing. But it's Betamax versus VHS. It's proven that this could work. Somebody had to show the market that it was possible. And having done that, that has unlocked a change to electric. And you can argue all day long about, well, is electric better? What about the batteries, etc.? But holistically, as those that have looked into it, it is a step in the right direction. It is much better. But it's that sense of you have to show the world in order to get people to adopt. And what you were talking to there is the tax incentives, is the government backing that new approach. That didn't happen before it was proved it's possible to do. And so we're inspired by that, but perhaps the more recent elements of what's happening with Musk we're avoiding.
Let's not go there, I think. I will be here all day. Okay, really interesting. So tell us what happens if I join the GLAD Climate Club. I'm paying you £1 a week, and then what happens? What do I get, Ben?
What do you get? Well, for us, everything is about impact. That's the only thing that matters. So our one metric that matters is greenhouse gas removed out of the atmosphere.
I remember when we first met, you told me this is quite different to a lot of climate change initiatives. Tell us a little bit about that first.
Yeah, exactly. So when you look at the world of climate change right now, basically what's happening is everyone's focused on reduction. So reduction in use of energy transition, electric vehicles, carbon offsetting, carbon accounting. It's about measuring how much you're emitting, trying to reduce it. And if you can't reduce completely down to renewables, do some offsetting. But the thing is, to tackle climate change, you need to do two things. You need to basically stop putting pollution up into the atmosphere and take out the pollution we've already put there. And our observation is there's a lot, nowhere near enough, but there's a lot of effort going into reduction, but not enough people are thinking about cleaning up the mess. And so we focused there and saying, well, what you actually need to do, you need to inspire governments to change policy. The only way in which to do that is to get a vast volume of people. And the only way in which to get a vast volume of people is make it as easy and as affordable as possible, £1 a week, and to show them that they're making a difference. And it's very difficult for me to show you that you're making a difference if I say, try to use less energy. Or if I say to you, use green energy, because you don't even notice the difference because you're just turning the light on or cooking your dinner or whatever it may be. But if I can show you that the impact you've had is an amount of greenhouse gas removed out of the atmosphere, and I can show you how that happened, exactly what solutions were used, and that increases over time so that your impact increases over time with your membership. You get a full and detailed understanding of, I've delivered this impact. You get that sense of feel good. You get to look good. You can show your peers, and ultimately the world is a cleaner place. So that's where we focus.
Okay, great. And tell me about these projects that you invest in. So I've got my £1 a week in there. I'm a member of the club. I'm feeling good about it. And I know that my money's going to greenhouse gas removal projects. What kind of projects are we talking about there?
Well, first of all, we talk about greenhouse gas removal because that's the job to be done. Those are the things that are causing the warming that we don't want. Really, the world right now talks about carbon removal. Carbon is, of course, carbon dioxide, one of the greenhouse gases. The reason we talk about greenhouse gas is because we need to be thinking about them all. But if we talk about carbon removal, to drill down a little bit, the world of carbon removal today is really focused and reliant on a handful of businesses contributing a heck of a lot. So the shining light in the industry is Microsoft. And they have committed, 60% of the entire market they've bought of carbon removal. And what they're buying are long-term, permanent, additional solutions. So it's a range of different things. It's things like enhanced rock weathering, like biomass sinking, direct air capture, it's biochar, lots of different methods, which I can explain about how this works. But the problem is we're relying on a few businesses spending a lot. It's just not scalable. So what we're doing is saying, let's flip that on its head. Let's get tiny amounts from millions of people. Let's try to inspire that and motivate that as a movement. But let's buy that as a portfolio so that we almost kind of spread where the money goes, investing in some that are more expensive, some that are more longer term in terms of their removal, some that can have an impact much quicker because speed really matters in this space.
Okay, so I'm almost buying into a kind of cooperative investment, almost impact investing fund, kind of.
It's a bit like that. It works a little bit like a pension. The way I put money into my pension is just every month I put money in a pot. I don't actively manage that pot. I'm not a financial expert. I let someone else take care of it for me. I am interested in how much my pension pot's got up, so every now and again I'll check on it. But I let the experts choose where the money goes because they're the experts. And so we think that approach can be fairly similar here. We aggregate the funds together, design the best portfolio that we can, and invest in those technologies. Now, the other thing with what happens in GLAD is an observation about what's happening in climate. So I mentioned there's these 2050 targets. They're just too far away. And the amount of greenhouse gas we've got to remove, it's just colossal. And people can't get their heads around it. So what we've done is you say, well, let's not work like that. Let's work in 12-week seasons. So we have each season the opportunity to design the portfolio. We'll say we're going to invest in these different technologies, these different solutions. And we will change our minds every 12 weeks. At the end of the 12 weeks, we'll deploy the money that we've collected from the members' fees, and we'll show the impact we had season by season. But the ability to change our minds allows us to pick and choose new technologies that come along. It allows us to dial down the ones that weren't as effective as perhaps we thought, because this is an imperfect market. It's nascent, it's evolving fast, and therefore we need that degree of flexibility. So we don't claim to be perfect, but we're finding the very best that we can, doing real diligence on exactly which ones we choose, trying to drive them forwards.
Really interesting. So I think that most of our listeners will be familiar with tree planting as a kind of, I guess you would call it a carbon removal kind of a strategy, and something that's sort of commonly included as like an added value of buying a product or taking part in some kind of service, and that business plants trees or whatever it is. That seems to be not the direction that you're favouring. You've got a few other kind of solutions that sound a bit more technical. What is that whole thing?
Yeah, so let's start with trees are good, right? We love trees.
Love trees.
The more trees we plant, the better. However, the real benefit to trees in terms of climate action is everyone knows what a tree is. So the simplicity of trees is its best attribute, if you like. The problem with trees is it takes a heck of a long time for them to grow. And if you think of the carbon, basically what a tree does is pull carbon out of the atmosphere, and think of the wood of the tree that you see above ground, but much more importantly, the roots that go underground, as the storage of the carbon. So once the tree has grown to full maturity, it's locked in the carbon and it's kind of done its job. Well, that's great, but it takes, I think, is on average about 15 years for the tree to have grown to the scale that it can capture the carbon. I'm not sure the exact number, but I'm going to say it's about 10 years before it's even carbon neutral because of the cost to actually go out and plant the tree. It's a small sapling for a long time. And then it depends where they are in the world, how fast they grow, what species you have, but they're at risk to fire. They're at risk to being cut down. They die ultimately. And when it dies, it rots, decays, and all that carbon goes back up into the atmosphere. So trees are good, but trees aren't the answer. And that doesn't mean we shouldn't be doing any tree planting in any way, shape or form. We should be doing a lot more of it. But what we observe is there are other technologies that we as a species are desperately already reliant upon, even though we don't necessarily realize it in aggregate. And we need to accelerate those technologies. So we're looking for the ones that are proven and validated, have already been invested in by these large corporates, which gives that sense of reassurance. They are certified by the regulatory bodies looking at this industry. So we've got confidence that they're going to work, but much more importantly, they lock away the carbon for a long time. And if you think about carbon, really what this is taking fossil fuel, we dig it out of the ground, burn it, and then it lives as a gas up in the atmosphere. So all you really need to do is take that gas, solidify it, and stick it back in the ground. Just move it. It's just a removal exercise. And so one simple example would be, direct air capture. This giant fan, you suck the air through it, and the chemical process takes the carbon, turns it into a solid, and then you can do stuff with it. And there's lots of different ways of doing this, but one thing is just storing that underground in vast repositories. So that's the almost physical manifestation of suck it out of the air, stick it back where it was in the first place. And we need this sort of technology. We need lots of different ones. And we need them at scale. So we choose not to invest in trees, but not because we don't like them, just because there are lots of people doing that already. And if we choose to invest there, we won't be accelerating a different technology, which we believe we're going to need.
Do you have a favorite greenhouse gas removal technology that you'd like people to know about and lobby for? And
I mentioned direct air capture, so I'll do another one. Enhanced rock weathering, I really like. And when I talk to people,
I love how geeky that sounds already.
Yeah, exactly. But it's the simplicity of it that's the beauty. It's something that just happens anyway. So think of a piece of coal. It's been burnt. It's dug out of the ground. It's been burnt. And the carbon dioxide has been released into the atmosphere. So now it lives as a gas up in there. And it's a rainy day. There's clouds in the sky. The rainwater falls through the clouds, interacts with the carbon that's in the air, and forms a weak carbonic acid. And as that lands on the ground, if it happens to land on a certain type of silicate rock, then that is a chemical reaction that's formed where that carbonic acid turns that and locks it away into carbon, like on the ground. And so that's happening, and it's been happening for millennia. Enhanced rock weathering is really just that and accelerating it. And so you find the right kind of rock. And if you can picture it, the water droplet hitting that, the bigger the surface area of the rock, the more likelihood of that turning into carbon. So you crush it into a fine dust and spread that dust over farmland. So you find the right farmland to spread it over because there are side benefits for the crops and things. You spread it using a farm process that already exists. So it's almost something and nothing, This is just happening. It's just a natural process. It's about getting the science right of the right rock, the right area, and waiting for it to rain. So yeah, I really like that one.
Well, that's got to be great for the UK then. That should be our number one.
You would think so. It's where the right rocks are. And I'll give you another specific thing there. So everything we do is about speed. We optimize for speed because the longer the greenhouse gas is up in the atmosphere, the more harm it's doing to us. So the quicker we can pull it out of the atmosphere, the better. So enhanced rock weathering. Different types of rock react, that's that process I've described, at different rates. So if one rock takes 20 years to lock away that carbon and another takes 5 years, I'm going to put my bets on the 5-year one. It's more expensive. There's less of it. the impact that will have for us all is significantly higher. So we choose to put our money there. So therefore, it's where is that rock? And the partner we work with has that rock, found it in Canada. So we do it in Canada. So,
Oh, great. Amazing. Come on, Keir Starmer, who I'm sure is a regular listener. This sounds ideal for a rainy climate like ours, I would say.
Exactly.
How do you motivate yourself as the leader of an organization like this that's trying to make a positive change in the world? Which, to me, anyway, it felt like we had loads of momentum about 5 years ago, maybe. And then now it feels like there's some very strong headwinds. Do you agree with that assessment? And then how do you kind of motivate yourself? How do you keep going? What's driving you?
Yeah, certainly what's in the media, there's more of a headwind than there was. But the thing is, that's gone in cycles for a while. It depends on your time frame. So back in the day, there was a real burst around climate activity from VCs in the US with solar incentives in the UK, and green tech was the next big thing. Lots of people ended up getting burnt because it then all went through a trough, and things go through peaks and troughs.
Just 2 years ago, we were interviewing Matt from Books, and he was talking about that he was in Silicon Valley at the time and saying everyone wants to invest in climate solutions, and now just in the space of a couple of years, that's changed.
But the thing that's also changed is the sort of undeniable thing of people can see the impact this is having. And you can pick on whichever extreme weather event you like, whether it be more extreme flooding, whether it be Californian fires, whether it be, what are we now, March and extreme flooding in Malaga, I think I saw just this week. It's now becoming front and center for people. And yes, there's a movement within certain kind of political spheres that this is all a hoax and it's not going to happen. But I think what that's doing is galvanizing those that are already awakened to the fact that this is a thing, that they need to do something about it. So I can't tell you that we've cracked it. I can't tell you that we've got the answer. I can't tell you that we've got the whole world with us yet. But I can tell you that the people I speak with are desperate to play their part, to do something, and that's a growing number of people. So I'm less worried about the kind of short-term temporal changes and more worried about trying to capture that sentiment that already exists within people and say, look, yes, you can, empowering them to actually make a difference. What motivates me to do that? I think it's just longer-term thinking. I was inspired early in my career by someone that talked about the cathedral builders. And I've always really liked this, the cathedral builders in the Middle Ages who just designed a vision of the future that would far surpass their own lifetime. So back in the day, I don't really know, but I think you lived to like 30, 35 years or something, and a church would take 300 years to build. And so what you are committing to is something far bigger than yourself, far bigger than the short-termism and kind of isolationism that we're seeing in the political movement. We need to be committing to long-term projects. Climate change is a massive problem. It's the biggest problem that I think we've ever faced. And I think I can make a difference. And the thing that gets me out of bed in the morning is I just want to prove that to one other person. And if I can get them to convince one other person and we get that kind of momentum, then I think we start to actually change the world. And so that's what drives me.
Excellent. And really interestingly, we've kind of come full circle to being frustrated with how long you had to spend on projects in construction. It's taken you to, the later stages of your career to see what they were on about, wanting to build those roads.
Exactly. That's it. That's it.
I love that. Yeah. Great. Let's move on to our final section of the conversation today. Sadly, a little bit radical world. I mean, we've just ended that section with this is the biggest problem we face in the world. But is there something else that you would like people to get behind? A little bit of a radical change for the world that you would like people? My new one is advanced rock weathering, just saying. I want people to get behind this. But how about you?
Well, so obviously I would love everyone in the world to join the GLAD Climate Club and show their peers, their friends that this is possible, that we can fix climate change. That's the thing that's top of the tree for me. But beyond that, beyond GLAD itself, I just firmly believe that climate change can be fixed. And I will give you another analogy that inspires me. I grew up in Yorkshire, and a guy called John Harrison grew up in Yorkshire, but a long, long time before I did. This is in a village called Folby, I think, the village over from me. And John Harrison was the guy that invented longitude, or solved the problem of longitude. He didn't invent it. But the story there is where there's a king's reward for anyone that could make a timepiece that could work at sea. There were certain parameters around it. And basically they thought that it would be solved by the academics and those from the kind of establishments. And it turned out it was built by a watchmaker in Folby. He got something like £5,000 as his reward, which obviously back then was a fair bit, but not as much as the world that he changed. And the point being that you don't need to be from the establishments. You don't need to be from a large corporate. You can make a difference. John Harrison has always inspired me, and all I really want to do to change the world is to get people to realize they can make a difference. So we're glad we make it as easy as possible. If they're going to choose to plant a tree, I'd love them to do that. Do something, but much more important than that, tell somebody else. Because it's that telling and that passing on and inspiring others that I think actually we can make a real difference.
Fantastic. And sadly, we're at the end now, Ben. So I have to ask you the last question, which is always the same, which is, there's someone listening to our conversation today who has a little bit of a radical idea for perhaps for a business or something they want to start or something for their personal life, but they don't know where to get started. What advice would you give them?
I would tell them to look for people who've done something similar in a different environment. So not to copy the business idea, but to look at the fundamentals of it. Look at what you're actually trying to do. Look at the problem you're trying to solve and find where the parallels are, because all I've ever done is copy. That's what all creatives do. It's what all artists do. It's just imitating what you've seen before and putting your own spin on it. And so I think drawing inspiration from others in other sectors and talk to as many people as you possibly can, I think would be the way I would approach it.
Well, Ben, thank you so much for giving us your time today. Really enjoyed our conversation. As I say, advanced rock weathering, I'm going to go down a Reddit rabbit hole now, I know for sure. But also, thank you so much for everything else you shared today, and hope to speak to you again soon.
Thank you for listening to this podcast. If you enjoyed it, please follow us on your podcast platform. If you'd like to appear on A Little Bit Radical or have an idea of someone we should speak to, please email podcast@standingongiants.com or get in touch with me on LinkedIn. You can search Rob Fawkes or search Standing on Giants and you'll find me there. Thank you very much and speak to you next time.